One of my favorite things about the Rodecaster Pro is all of the versatility it has to let you adjust your audio so it sounds exactly the way that you want it to. So you have the best audio for your audience, and they don't say adios to your stuff that you're making. But a question I get a lot is, how do you use and adjust the effects on the Rodecaster Pro? Because if you've just gotten it and you've taken it out of the box, it might not be immediately obvious. If you press the button for any of the audio channels, you'll have a few options there, and one of them is audio processing, and that is where your audio gets processed. So if you tap on that, straight out of the box, you're gonna see this screen here, which is just on-off switches for audio processing. For example, here's channel 1 that I'm using right now. Processing is turned off. If I turn it on, then everything is automatically turned on, and you've probably heard a pretty big change in audio. So I'm going to turn those off, because sometimes if you're using a fat mic, you need no effects. There's like 3 people who are going to get that joke. You're welcome. But this doesn't give you a lot of flexibility if it's just turning everything on or off, because there's a lot of nuance in these effects. This is basically the Rodecaster's way of protecting you from yourself. What I would recommend doing, if you haven't done so, or as soon as you get your Rodecaster, is clicking on the advanced options, going to audio, going into processing, and then making sure to turn on effects edit mode. And what that's going to do is, now when you go into your audio processing, you're not just going to see on-off switches, you're going to be able to go into each thing, enable it by itself, and then also once you've got it enabled, you can fine-tune and adjust it. And you shouldn't be timid in playing with this. Feel free to experiment and see what each setting does. If you do something that makes it sound absolutely terrible, you can just tap this little backwards arrow and it will reset everything. So you're always just one click away from going back to resetting. I do recommend using a very light touch with your effects processing. If you go in and you just turn on everything and crank it to the max, you're gonna get a really weird sound. But depending on your microphone, your voice, your environment, using things like the noise gate or the de-esser. When using the pod mic, I always use a bit of the big bottom, because that's a mic that leans towards the high end of the frequency spectrum. So it's a really, really versatile thing to be able to do. Now, something you might not know that I didn't really discover until I'd had the Rodecaster for a while is that this interface, especially while you're recording or streaming or something, even though it's a nice touch screen, it can be a little clunky. So if you have your Rodecaster connected to your computer, you can open up the companion app and then click on Open Effects Editor. And that is going to bring real-time processing right to your computer. So that means you can see all of your channels, you can see your master output, and you can go into these channels and do the exact same thing that I just did in the Rodecaster. You can see each of the different effects, you can go in and change them. It's the exact same menu that's in the actual Rodecaster. You can have your master output. Everything is right there, and every change that you make through the companion app also affects the actual Rodecaster. So if you get things dialed in this way, exactly how you like them, it'll be saved into the Rodecaster even if you disconnect it from your computer. If you get settings that you really like, you can always go into File and Save a Show, and that way those settings will be saved. And then you can even create a new show, which could include a different batch of settings. So if you have one thing set up for streaming where it's just you, and another thing set up for like a podcast where you have a co-host or you're using a different microphone, you can actually create different shows, so that way you can just preload those presets and you don't have to adjust them every time. And of course, very important with the Rodecaster Pro, this is also where you can update the firmware or check for firmware updates. One of the biggest benefits of the Rodecaster Pro is how often Rode does update it, not just with firmware updates, but with pretty major ones, and adding in different abilities and processing and flexibility. So be sure you're always up to date, and then you'll get the most out of your Rodecaster Pro. And thank you, as always, to everybody who supports my channel. I really appreciate it. It means the world to me. And of course, there's a whole plethora, a bevy, you might say, of Rodecaster Pro videos that I have made, because this is one of my favorite things ever. So if you want to learn more about it, check out one of the videos in this playlist, and you'll learn a lot of really fun stuff.